The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, as we're days away from the start of free agency, still so many questions about a lot of pending UFAs. I want to start with the Leafs corner. What are you hearing about John Tavares and whether or not he's close or not close to signing a new deal with the Leafs?
Well, he's not close right now. At least that's my understanding. But, because there are those days you're referencing, I don't know yet what to read into that. I don't really want to make any predictions or be inferring anything. But, the reason this one, to me, hasn't been as up in the air, I guess, is because clearly both sides started wanting the same thing. John Tavares, I don't think could have been any more clear about wanting to remain a Maple Leaf, and the Leafs want to keep John Tavares. But, in saying all that, you've got to find the right price. And this is a hard time right now, not just for this negotiation, not just with this team. I think in a world where the cap is jumping up to $95.5 million, a lot of free agents expect to make more money in this environment. Not saying that just about John, but in general, when the cap's going up, even the fourth liners are looking to make more money. I think as a player, you don't want to make a deal that might in reverse not look so good. And obviously a team is in the same spot. And I see this situation having some equivalencies to Steven Stamkos last year in Tampa, in the sense that for Stamkos, there was one price in Tampa he was willing to take. And then when he went to the open market, he ended up signing for $32 million in Nashville. It was a different thing. He wasn't asking for that same contract he got in Nashville and Tampa. I think the same goes for Tavares. He knows if he's staying in Toronto, it's going to be for less money than what he could get on the open market. But figuring out how much less is the less is kind of where things are gummed up at the moment. And, I still think that there's enough common ground here to find your way to the finish line. But a week out from July 1st, they're not there yet. And, you start to get to where emotion comes into things a little bit. I'm sure both sides are trying to stay away from that. But you get this close, it becomes quite real. And so this is a really big week to see, if they can get a deal done. I still think it's definitely possible Tavares doesn't sign in Toronto. I think that it's still at a spot where it could go, it could go where both sides don't want it to go, frankly. And that's what ended up happening in the Stamkos case. I'm not going to jump to that conclusion just yet because there is time to find the way. But it's getting down to kind of the white knuckle time of a negotiation where, I think that both sides have to feel each other out. And for the Leafs, they need centermen. That's not a mystery. I think they need another one, even if Tavares ends up staying. But, they don't want to just sign someone at a high price just to keep them. And for Tavares, this is real money. It's pride. It's all those things. How much are you willing to leave on the table? I think that's what they're trying to work through right now.
So is money, we're talking a couple million holding this up? Is term part of this too? What can you say a little bit more specifically about what's holding up a deal from being done?
Well, straight up just money. Now, term is interesting because that's a way to sometimes bridge your gap financially. If the Leafs end up stretching this deal over, say, a 6-year contract, they can probably get the overall AAV down. And the reason Tavares would do that is because if it's spread out over 6 years, he still gets paid a sum of money that he deems fair for this time. And so, that could end up being a solution, I would say, in this situation. And look, we're at a moment in time. Tavares is probably not going to get better at his age, but we've just seen, some players, Brad Marchand, is going to cash in again at age 37 in free agency. And so, there's clearly some risk if the Leafs do a 6-year deal, for example, or a 5-year deal. They did one last year, though, with Chris Tanev. So there's some precedent there. I think those details are kind of where it's at. And here's the funny thing, guys. I don't think either side knows exactly what the magic number is for each side, if that makes sense. I think that as much as there was talk even going back in the regular season, I don't think there was former contract exchanges, but talk about, keeping Tavares, what the deal might look like. But I don't think each side has shown its hand yet. And, sometimes in negotiations, that's the way it goes, right? If you're on the player's end, you might say it is going to take this to sign me. And then the other side basically has a decision to make. Like, are we willing to pay him that? Or do we want to, do we have to go our separate ways? Like, I still think at the bargaining table, there's a little bit of uncertainty about, exactly what it's going to take. And so I don't have that number either. I know looking at other comparables from recent years that, the Giroux contract in Ottawa, which was 3 years times 6.5. Mm-hmm. Anze Kopitar signed a 2-year extension in LA at $7 million. Joe Pavelski, before he retired, played on, I think, a $6 million deal in Dallas. Like, I think 6+ was kind of the Tavares range. And obviously the Leafs would like to keep it lower than that. But as I mentioned, there's creative ways, and the Leafs are a creative team with their contracts. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. I've said all along that I think this is one of those times a deferred money deal might even make sense. Now, those are being wiped out, I believe, in this next CBA. So I don't know. Better get it in under the wire here. There's a possibility that this thing, the CBA is winding down. But, I do think there's ways to get there, and they are still talking. Like, so I should say, like, even though this doesn't appear imminent in this moment, there's time for some movement this week. But, this is a big week around the league, right? You have the draft before the end of this week, which obviously takes up time and energy for the front offices. There's a lot of trade chatter going on, which I think the Leafs are part of as an organization. And then we're not too far off here from the July 1st bell ringing. And I don't think if it gets to that point, obviously the Tavares camp is going to have to listen to other teams. And, every once in a while, a player gets to July 1st and stays where he is, but it's a pretty rare occurrence. Once you kind of open your mind to everything else out there, you're not going back to where you were.
I know this next question is jumping ahead here. Mm-hmm. Leafs fans have been mentally preparing for weeks of Mitch Marner being gone once July 1 hits, and we'll get to him in a second. If you're a Leafs fan, how are you going to be feeling if Mitch Marner and John Tavares are gone, knowing that they're both impact players, but knowing the history with this team and the organization in the playoffs, but also thinking of how is this team going to fill both of those spots? Again, very much ahead in the future. As we know, things could change between now and July 1. But if I'm a Leafs fan and I'm looking at my roster and Tavares is gone and Marner's gone, I have a lot of questions about how Brad Treliving is going to handle this free agency period.
That's fair, but the Leafs, and if that scenario plays out, the Leafs will have a ton of cap space. I mean, Mitch Marner and John Tavares accounted for almost $22 million on the cap last season, so it's $22 million in free cap space plus the $7-odd million the cap's going up. I mean, the Leafs would have a lot of room to maneuver then. And look, some people in this market have been clamoring for change, right? And saying that, that the whole core four experiments failed. Now, the Marner decision is taken right out of the Leafs' hands. I mean, he's driving the bus there. He's got all the power, the leverage. His hands are on the steering wheel, and he's leaving town. The Leafs obviously have a fair say still in the Tavares thing. But, if it doesn't go down, I mean, it makes this is going to be an interesting summer either way for the Leafs. And I would say this, the team that you see on your, if you go to the roster or the Puckpedia page on July 2nd isn't going to be the team entering the year. I think there's an expectation this is going to be a bit of a drawn out summer for the Leafs, that, they're going to probably be combing the trade market. And that doesn't mean just deals that happen this week around the draft. That could mean deals that happen into July and August I think it's going to be a long summer for Brad Treliving. It's not just going to be, hey, sign 3 depth players on July 1st and put up the gone fishing sign. So no matter how this all plays out, it's going to be a work in progress, probably right into September in training camp. And then even after that point, of course, then you got the whole 6-7 months into the trade deadline. I mean, look, I don't think the Leafs know what their team's going to look like. I certainly can't sit here and say I know what it's going to look like. When you remove a all-star first line right winger, 100-point player, that already just creates a lot of uncertainty, because there's lots of ways you can go about replacing that player. I mean, you're not going to replace him 1 for 1. I'm talking about Marner now. But, with that cap space, you could sign 2 forwards, for an example, and start spreading things around differently and looking at a different roster construction altogether. If you add a Tavares absence on top of that, exit, I mean, it could go in a whole bunch of different ways. And I would think the trade market, I think it wouldn't be just free agency that the Leafs are looking at, because, I've got a free agency board out there right now. There's just not enough there to restock the cupboard. But that being said, there's a trade board coming soon, and there are players available for trade. So, this is probably what some Leaf fans are probably looking at this like they're nervous, because there's definitely unknowns there. But I think a lot of people have been thinking that things have to change too. And so the change is coming. It's going to take some time, and we'll see yet. I'm not willing to, I don't want to sound too negative of a tone, because I do think there's time. As I mentioned, when both sides want the same thing, usually you find your way there, even if it's a bit of a bumpy ride. I still think there's plenty of time here and plenty of will at the table for Tavares and the Leafs to sign an extension, but it hasn't gone smooth. It hasn't happened quickly. Obviously, it hasn't been announced. And I do think if you look around the league, not that many contracts have been signed by players. I mean, there's been a few with the Duchesne deal last week and a couple others. But, I think this is a real feeling out period for both players and teams about what this salary cap jump means. And it's not just this one that we're entering this season. It's the year after, right? Tavares isn't signing a 1-year deal. So it's contemplating what's fair, and fair is it's a relative term, right? Fair is it's not a black and white proposition. It's not a yes or no. It's not a binary thing. It's that's what they're negotiating on, and we'll see. It's a big week. I told you last week it was a big week for John and Toews. They got a deal done. Let's see if this one follows.
We'll definitely touch on Jonathan Toews later in the show. We should move on to Mitch Marner. What are you hearing about teams interested? I mean, there's obviously going to be teams interested in him, but what about some of the teams who might show the most interest as of July 1? And how much money could he stand to make out there?
Well, I'll say this. The industry sentiment is that Vegas is the team that everyone's kind of looking at. Look, Vegas has a tremendous track record of attracting talent. They've made monster trades. They've signed major free agents in the past. And so they're always looking for difference makers. They're always a competitive team. It's a great place to live. I mean, we all know what the Golden Knights are by this point in time. So they have an MO. So that's the thing I can't gather is this just everyone assuming because Vegas is in on everything? But I will just say in the course of my daily conversations around the league, like the feeling is they should be viewed as kind of the quote unquote favorites in this. I do think that, Mitch Marner's personal views though, is that he's open to other places too. The one place I keep hearing again and kind of rumbling style is Dallas. I don't know how that works. I mean, we had a chat about Dallas the other day, but they don't have a lot of cap space. That would require some significant trades to make the cap space fit. But I do think that's at least a place that would appeal to Marner. I think the LA Kings are going to get involved in Marner, obviously with a GM change, them trying to shake things up. I'm not sure that's as appealing to the Marner camp, but look, they're going to listen to what everyone has to say. I still think the biggest monetary offer might come from a team like Carolina. The Hurricanes, obviously tried to trade for Mitch Marner at the deadline. At that time, he vetoed the trade, so to speak. He didn't waive his no movement clause. I'm not sure that was tied so much as to not wanting to go to Carolina as him not wanting to go anywhere at that point in time. He wanted to play out his deal and get the free agency. And so, be very interested to hear, can they put some kind of figure in front of him that makes him think twice? I mean, the other part of this is, the reason Mitch Marner is contemplating leaving Toronto is I think at this point in time, he's just had enough of the noise. He's been a player under tremendous spotlight, a lot of scrutiny that comes with that, of course. We know his wife had a baby during the playoffs between rounds 1 and 2. So he started a new family. It's like a new chapter in his life. And so there's different places that you might look if you're of that frame of mind. You're looking for something a little quieter in terms of your profession. There's a number of places that would fit the bill, but certainly I think the Hurricanes will be in there. And look, there could be a surprise team or two as well. I don't get the sense that, there'd been some talk about Utah. I don't think that is as likely to happen as we're getting closer here. But basically, if I just go straight on what I'm hearing, I'd have to say Vegas is the favorite. But I'm not saying that with a ton of confidence. I don't know. It's not like someone with the Golden Knights is telling me that. I should be clear. It's just that's kind of the industry sentiment at this point in time. As for what he could make, I mean, what's the contract look like? There's all these talk now. It hasn't been confirmed to me that he wants a 2-year deal. Like, I'm not sure where that's coming from. This is a wild period. There's a couple things going on, Julian. First of all, it's just, lots of people are talking. So it's sort of like that run up to the trade deadline. Like, there's just more rumors because more people are having more conversations. It's like the game of broken telephone is getting louder across the league, right? And then on top of that, obviously, we're getting closer to decisions. But then the third thing is, you might remember back in November, Bill Daly, the deputy commissioner of the NHL, sent a pretty strongly worded email about tampering around to the GMs. It was addressed at the November GMs meeting. I don't believe that tampering is stopped around the NHL, but I think that everybody is being a little more careful about how they're tampering or what they're saying. So, I think that there's an extra layer of uncertainty to everything because everyone's being a little more careful than I'd say than is usual at this point in time. And so there's a lot of crap out there. But look, I mean, Marner, I think it depends where he goes. If he goes somewhere like Dallas, honestly, I don't see him making more than $10 million, $10.5 million. Now, those are different dollars, right? I don't want to get into the tax thing, but those are it's a different dollar amount than if you sign in California, right, where there's a much higher tax rate than you have in the state of Texas. If he goes for the pure monetary play, I could see him getting 12.5, 13 million in other locations. But it's hard to just say this is what his contract will be because I think it is ultimately going to be situational. And I do think we are getting into a window, whether it's Marner or somebody else, where shorter term deals are going to become more of a norm for top players. I think it's a way for them to just be sure they're not leaving a bunch of money on the table. Let's play it the other way. So we know the next 3 years, the cap is doing major jumps, significant jumps, up to over 110 million. Keep in mind, this year we were under 90 million, big jumps. If you sign an 8-year deal today, you feel good that you got security. But you're committing the next 8 years. We don't know what's going to happen in the 5 years beyond the next 3. What happens if it keeps going? What happens if it's $150 million cap in 8 years and you signed all that time away now? You can never argue against an 8-year contract for a player because it is guaranteed in the NHL. This is a physical sport. A lot of things change. You can get injured. For a lot of players, they're just looking at the total amount on that deal and they're going, yeah, I'll take 30 million or 40 million or 100 million, wherever you are in the pecking order. But I think you have to understand if you're a top player, that could be a huge swing in difference. In terms of what you can make long term. For example, I'm pretty sure if you look at Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid right now in their careers, I'm pretty sure Matthews is almost equal to what McDavid's made in one fewer year, even though we would all agree McDavid's probably been the better player, of course, or has been the better player. I don't mean to hedge that. But, McDavid signed an 8-year second deal. Look, that gave him lots of security too. $100 million contract he got. But Matthews did a 5-year and then a 4-year, and he's been able to accelerate things that way, right? I think it's proven over, if you look in reverse, players who've signed shorter term deals did better and in overall financials. So just trying to set it up to have everyone prepared that maybe Marner does do a shorter deal. There's some risk in that for him too, though. If he has a performance dip with a new team, maybe it doesn't go well, right? I personally would bet on Mitch to have I think his next stage, I think he's going to go to another level. Honestly, I do think it's been real, dealing with a lot of the stuff he's had to deal with in Toronto. I do believe it's weighed him down. I do think a fresh start, a new perspective, a little less attention, being part of a new team, the challenges that come with all those things. I think that'll bring out the best in him. But if it doesn't, and you sign a really short deal, you're at the market a couple of years from now, and you're maybe not looking as great as he looks today. So, I mean, look, those are all the things that he's working through with his agents, the pros and cons of those types of deals. I mean, either way, we know he's going to be looked after well. He's going to be paid among the top paid players in the league, and he should be because he's performed that way.
Brother, there's so much to unpack off of that answer, which was really great. We've done it before where we did an entire episode on Mitch Marner.
I feel like I just got on my soapbox and just went in 12 directions at once.
No, but there's one direction I need to go back to. It's the idea of Mitch Marner in a Dallas Stars uniform. I had to just go look this up really quickly on Puckpedia here. As of this recording, Puckpedia says they have about 2.755 mil in cap space. That is a team we knew already entering July 1, where if they were going to have to make some moves if they wanted to give themselves some more cap space to sign some of the pending UFAs. Of course, they found a way to bring in Matt Duchene. They traded away Mason Marchment. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying if it gets to that point where Mitch Marner says he wants to go to the Dallas Stars, Jim Nill's offseason is going to be very interesting. And that probably means, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that probably means Jason Robertson's on the way out.
Yeah, and that's why I couched it as saying I'm not saying this is likely. I just think that that's a spot that appeals to the Marner side of things. You know, I think Marner would be interested in them if they could find their way to the table. I'm not sure they can find their way to the table. But look, it's already been a busy offseason for the Stars. I mean, they're narrowing in on their head coach here now. They made the Duchene deal. They traded Mason Marchment to Seattle. They signed Niels Lundqvist. They signed Maverick Bourque, who might have been an offer sheet candidate, all in the last 4 days or so. And they are gauging the market on Jason Robertson. Now, that doesn't guarantee they trade Robertson. I think one thing people might be losing sight of, Robertson's deal, he has one more year in his contract, but he's a restricted free agent next summer. So the Stars would still have his rights. So this is not a case where they have to do anything. Now, next summer, it does bring up an interesting time because if he plays out this year, Jason Robertson, then next summer, he's 1 year from unrestricted free agency. It's like, what kind of contract are you signing him? Maybe you're trading him then. I mean, I think the Stars are just gauging the market as my read on things now. Like, they haven't decided they're trading him. I think they just want to get a picture of what a trade might net them, what that could look like, the pros and cons of those things. Obviously, at some point in time, I think once we get into the summer, if they don't trade him, they'll engage Jason Robertson's camp on trying to extend him. I mean, it's just, you're at a moment in time, and it's sort of like where Noah Dobson is today in Long Island, where he's 1 year from UFA, and it's the same kind of dynamic. It's like, are we signing you to a big deal now? Are we trading you? So it's players get to that window. If you sign a 3-year second contract, then it does set up this interesting summer. And that's sort of where Robertson is with the Stars. I think that Matt Dumba is another player they're looking to move. This is outside of the Marner discussion, but just to maintain their cap flexibility. I mean, Dallas is probably getting worse right now on paper this summer just because they're losing players, right? They need the money. They're trying to re-sign Jamie Benn to a cheap deal to keep him as a star. Mikael Granlund, I think, is a player that fit in really well there, but I just don't think they're going to have the money to keep him from becoming a free agent. So, Jim Nill's got a lot of balls in the air, we'd say. And after reaching 3 straight Western Conference finals, they're doing something very right, but they need to be a little more right? I mean, they need to get to a point where they can take that, it's really 2 more big steps, but certainly 1 more big step and get past the third round of the playoffs and play for Stanley Cup. So I think when you're in that mode, you're willing to consider a lot of things because, they're right there. I think they can also bank on players getting better. Like, it was a tough playoff for Wyatt Johnston, who's had some great playoffs the previous 2 years. But I think if you're the Stars, you're probably looking at that and going, that's not going to be repeated. Like, this is a player that's still on very much on the upswing in terms of his trajectory of his career. So look, I'm not at all floating this as a likelihood. I'm just saying, when you ask about places I think where Marner might want to be, that is one I think he'd love to at least see if there could be a fit. But that's major surgery we're talking about, to make to remove that much salary and sign him and still have to have money to do other things. It might just be too much to ask, quite honestly. So maybe we've wasted everyone's time by going down that road. But I want to be clear. I'm not saying this is likely to happen. It's just something that could happen if a lot of things come together.
It's not a waste of time at all. Like, considering what the Dallas Stars have been through, you mentioned the conference finals, the Mikko Rantanen trade, just picturing a team with Rantanen and Marner at its center, with some of the other pieces there, just like, I would, wow. Like, just, I know it's not, I know you're not saying it's likely to happen. It's just fun to imagine.
I'll tell you, I'm very curious where Carolina goes in this. Like, I know I just mentioned them earlier, but like they might have the deepest team in the league. When you look at just top to bottom, I mean, Florida, I guess Florida, they're still parade. They're like 6 days into their cup parade here. They're still going around. But so I don't know. They might have lost a few men in that battle that's happened since the playoffs ended. But, you know, Carolina, when you think about how consistently they've got in the playoffs, I realize they're getting to the third round and then getting smoked. But they're doing that without a superstar, right? Most other teams that have big success in the league are getting driven by star players. Like if they could ever drop a star or two into their program with basically the same team, like I just think that they would be ready to take that step. I wonder if they can, in some way, shape, or form, sell Marner on that, right? Sell Marner on what a great place it is, especially for families. I think, you know, the Raleigh area is underrated for that. He's walking into a good team. That much he knows. I mean, the proof is right there in front of him with, was it 7 years in a row? They've won at least a playoff series, I think, 6 or 7. You know, they have the money to spend. I don't know. You wonder if someone interesting can get in and convince him. Like the fact that Marner doesn't necessarily want to sign this deal on July 1st, I do think that opens the possibility to something unexpected happening, right? When it's all a rush to get done on one day, I think that's where it's like, okay, this has already kind of been decided in someone's mind. You know, but if he truly does take that window of time, which Darren Dreger, my TSN colleague, reported is something he's looking to do, might even go out and visit some places in person before making a decision. I just wonder if someone can woo him, win him over. Do you know what I'm saying? Like somewhere that's like maybe not number one in his mind today, but once he gets into those conversations, it feels right, and then he gets down there. Because I do think that the Hurricanes are one star player away from being a different team. And if they could ever get two sort of close to star level guys, I mean, they might be a Stanley Cup team. I mean, I think that's how close they are. So, you know, there's some interesting dynamics, I guess, that could still enter this if Marner doesn't sign on July 1st, which seems to be where he's leaning right now.
I do like Carolina for him. I can totally see Vegas getting it on him. I still think Los Angeles makes a lot of sense considering the cap space they have and how they want to get to the next level too after a disappointing year.
Keep in mind with LA, by the way, Jake Muzzin, who played with Marner in Toronto, but obviously had a long run with the Kings, won 2 cups there. He's a good friend of Marner, and I'm sure he's got some good things to say about LA too, to his buddy. But look, and he's not alone. You know, there's probably guys out there that he played with from Minnesota saying like, hey, Don't underestimate Minnesota for how good a place it is to live. And we're not talking about the Wild signing Marner. So, you know, it must be weird to be this player, essentially, like the number one guy on the board, you know, who can not exactly pick his spot, but to some degree can probably dictate where he goes. I mean, my point is you probably got a lot of opinions and people on your texting you and telling you, hey, do this, do that.
Unless there's anything else you want to add, this ends one of the most fun Leafs corners we've ever had. We went in like so many different directions. We talked about so many different teams in Leafs corner.
Yeah, I should mention too. I know we mentioned him last week, but the Matthew Nyes negotiation, I still expect that to drag on a little while. It's not that one isn't getting wrapped up easily or quickly either. Which, you know, again, look around league wide, not a lot of players signing, so it doesn't make the Leafs unique in this, but you know, it's obviously a big piece of business that's on their to-do list this summer. I don't think that there's reason for panic there yet. I certainly don't see him getting an offer sheet the Leafs probably wouldn't match, although we'll see. And but that one sounds like a bit of a grind right now too. Okay,
then let's go around the league. What are you hearing on Rasmus Andersson, who there's a lot of talk around him and him having one more year left on his deal in Calgary? What could be up in the air for him?
Well, it sounds like he is not willing to sign a new deal right now in Calgary. That you know, I think he's open to seeing what else might be out there for him. And so naturally the Flames are going to gauge the market. And, you know, I think this could be this sort of situation where the player doesn't end up getting traded till later in the year. Maybe, like, who knows how it plays out, because he is under contract for another season. You know, if he enters the year in Calgary, obviously we'll be looking at the trade deadline. But what happens if the Flames take another step forward and they're not they're very much in the playoff race? I mean, who knows how it goes down? I don't think they have to do anything, but you know, he's a unique player, right shot defenseman, high character guy. just wore the captaincy for Sweden at the World Hockey Championship. Physical, not the best skater. Something that I think if you're any team and you're signing him to like a 7-year extension, you might be nervous about how he'll age. It doesn't mean it'll be bad, but I just think it would give you some pause. And look, the Flames didn't bottom out. As you know, Julian, you were there. But they have traded away a lot of older players in the last few years. They're definitely retooling on the fly kind of thing. And, I think that there's a case to be made anyway. He just might not be the right player to extend well into his 30s before you've done that, especially when, I think he could bring you back a pretty significant asset or assets in a deal. So, there's definitely some thought that this is a trade to keep an eye on. He'll be number 1 or number 2 on the Athletics trade board when it comes out this week, still finalizing some of the picture there, but it gives you a sense of, I think, how important he is, how effective he can be, and that there'll be a real market for his services. So, it's, they've talked with Calgary a little bit in this offseason. I think everyone's kind of on the same page, and now the Flames don't have to rush anything, but they can, do think that they're exploring, what it might look like to trade him, and if that makes sense for where they're going, sort of bigger picture.
I still think if you're a contending team and you're able to plug Rasmus Andersson on your second pairing, that you must have a damn good defense. I get you on the skating, but the fact that he could play in all situations, including the power play, even if he isn't the best skater, he does have some ability to him. I know there's been some wear and tear. He played the last 12 games of the season on a broken fibula, but I think if he's healthy, he could be a real good guy for your room in terms of just being no nonsense, wanting to win, and being able to contribute at both ends. Like, that's a guy, if I'm a GM and I want to make my team better, I at least think about that possibility.
Right. But part of the dynamic would be, and you're right, like, this is why he's going to be up right at the top of the trade board, is because, like, lots of straight up the player, like, most GMs are going to like what you got there. The problem, I guess, would be is if you're trading for him and you're giving up a lot, because Calgary's not going to give him away. Can you sign him this summer to an extension? What does that extension look like? Is it a number you can live with? I mean, those are some of the things I think teams are going to have to figure out before pulling the trigger on someone like that, because I can't imagine you're going to make a big deal for him and then walk him right to free agency in a year. Someone might do that. Do you know where it makes a ton of sense? I mean, this is like the Dallas Stars corner, but Dallas has been looking to fill a right side hole ever since Chris Tanev left last summer. They signed Ilya Lyubushkin, they signed Matt Dumba, who I mentioned is available right now in the trade market. He would be the ideal fit. I don't know if the numbers can add up, if that can make sense for the same reason that Marner would be a challenge for them. But I do think that stylistically and sort of exactly what that team needs is sort of what Rasmus Andersson brings. And, I think for Rasmus, obviously, if he's going to get traded anywhere and consider signing, he's going to want to have a chance to win a cup, right? Like he's at the stage of his career. He's been in Calgary a long time, and the team's kind of just been in the middle or not certainly not been in cup contention window since he was pretty young, back when they still had Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk, and, they had some President's Trophy winning year. So, he, at this stage of his career, he wants to win, but he's also going to want to maximize his earning power. And so all those things will be dynamics of a potential trade. And as I mentioned, very possible this doesn't happen this summer, but if it happens, this week could be a big week for it, because obviously, with the draft happening on Friday, there's definitely going to be some moves around the league. And I think he's right at the top of the list of players that the teams will be shopping for.
I have to imagine if you're the Flames, you're wanting that player in between the ages of 18 and 23 as part of your return. The Flames have draft capital. They've been drafting all these players the last few years. They'll stand to draft more this year. I have to imagine somewhere in their return for Rasmus Andersson, if a trade comes to pass, that eye of that trade, of their desire, has to be a young player who they can plug into their lineup and then hope to have as part of their core going forward. That's something they've said openly that they have desired for their team for years. I have to imagine for Rasmus Andersson, a player who could stand to attract a ton of attention, particularly this week, they have to get a player of that type of value in return.
Sure, but keep in mind, too, you could still get a pick that you're using to make a subsequent trade, right? Like, it doesn't mean, let's not get too rigid that it doesn't mean that they couldn't take back a draft pick in this deal. Like, I don't think it's impossible.
You're right. You're absolutely right on that for sure. They totally could, but I also think that they definitely would want, if there's a deal that gets them a really good young player, like I think they'd listen in on that. That's just my point. But you're absolutely right. Yeah. They would totally take a draft pick. What about JJ Peterka? What are you hearing on him?
This is a hard file. Clearly, there's a lot of noise around him, but he needs he's a restricted free agent. Obviously, there's teams that like him. I had a scout tell me yesterday, like, for him, he's Nikolai Ehlers, but 9 years younger. You're getting him heading into the beef of his career if you were trading for him. And so obviously lots of teams like him, but who else likes him is the Buffalo Sabres. So it doesn't seem as though he's inclined to stay in Buffalo to sign a deal, but Sabres own his rights and don't have to trade him. And so it's hard to get a read on this. Like, I get the feeling Buffalo's more worried about, trying to find maybe a new home for Bowen Byram, another restricted free agent. And they just got so much money tied up in other defensemen. Even Alex Tuck's name's out there a little bit. He's 1 year out from being UFA. I don't know how much of a priority it is for Buffalo to trade him at this point in time. I mean, certainly, I think they're definitely in a mode where they have to listen, but it's not like we got to trade him in 4 days and let's go. Let's line up the best offers and let's go. And so the Peterka drama, if we want to call it that, might extend on into the offseason because, might end up being a stare off. I mean, Buffalo does own his rights. I don't want to jump to some far off land, but the Sabres, could get to a point if he doesn't want to sign, well, then he can't play in North, I hope it doesn't get to that point for his sake, but I just don't get the sense that anything is imminent or that they're, sending him elsewhere right now.
Okay.
This second.
No, it's okay. What about anything going on in Florida? I know we were kicking around a couple different names we've talked about before, but we know Bill Zito has a ton of decisions to make on guys like Brad Marchand, Aaron Ekblad, and Sam Bennett this offseason.
As of Monday morning, nothing done there. I still expect Bennett to stay. I mean, look, this isn't just the nightclub in the 11 nightclub in Miami where he says he's staying. He's like at the parade saying 8 more years. Even Aaron Ekblad got up there and he's like, my agent told me not to say anything. Like, way to hurt your leverage, buddy, to Bennett. But it does seem like the sentiment is that Bennett is likely to stay on an 8-year contract. If he does, it's going to be a little less than some of the money that got kicked around when he was having that great run through the playoffs and ultimately winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. I think if he stays in Florida, it's $8 million or maybe even a little less on an 8-year deal for him. Don't have as good a sense elsewhere. I mean, Marchand is giving off mixed signals. If he went just by his public appearances around this championship parade, you might conclude that he's staying, but I'm not going to put too much stock in that. I mean, part of it, you have to try to put yourself in the shoes of the players here. Like, they did just go through that grind. They won a Stanley Cup together. Obviously, it's a close team. Obviously, they're having fun. They're letting loose. It would be hard to be in that mix and be like, no, I'm leaving for more money to another city. You're not going to say that.
No.
So I think we have to take some of it with a grain of salt, so to speak. And, the feeling, again, it seems more likely than not that Ekblad might be moving on. Not that that's not to say the doors are closed, but I would say that's the industry sentiment. I mean, look, you're talking about defenseman who just played 24 minutes a night in the playoffs, all situations guys, put up great offensive numbers earlier in his career. Had a really strong postseason run. In fact, after missing 20 games for the performance enhancing drug suspension he served in March and into April, and so I think his value as a free agent. It's possible that it's just too much money to leave on the table somewhere else. But, I think the Panthers will take these right down to the wire. So what they did last year is Sam Reinhart. Now, they were dealing with a little shorter window because they didn't win the Cup till June 25th last year. But, it wasn't until like midnight at June 30th that Sam Reinhart signed his 8-year extension with the Panthers. Wouldn't surprise me if Bill Zito goes down to the wire again. Certainly expect him to keep at least one of those 3 players Wouldn't surprise me if it's 2. I don't think he can do all 3.
Okay, what about Marco Rossi out of Minnesota?
Still some trade chatter around him. It's a tough player to move because I think that the Wild want back a current player, right? And that's the difficult thing is I think some of the best offers or offers plural that they have been largely like a draft pick futures kind of deal. That doesn't work for where the Wild are today. I mean, they're finally getting out of cap jail from those buyouts of Ryan Suitor and Zach Parise. They got a big piece of business in getting Kirill Kaprizov's extension done this summer. He's 1 year out from UFA. They had Vegas in some ways. I won't maybe go so far as to say on the ropes, but they had a chance, certainly a strong chance to win that series in round 1. It was a tough year on the injury front for the Wild, but they fought through it and, weren't too far off being a team that got to the second round. So they're not looking to take much of a step back. The problem was during that playoff run, Rossi was a fourth liner for them, playing 11 minutes a game when the games were most important. And so, I know teams have been around him. Like I could see Carolina being a fit for him, Vancouver, but no one has sort of stepped up and put the right mix together. And you just wonder is there any world where they could get back together and do a deal and keep him because he's a restricted free agent this summer if the offers don't get to that level. So, that's kind of my sense of where things are at with Rossi, but it's not a deal where I think it'd be quote unquote an easier trade if they were just looking for futures. But the fact, they're kind of looking for what we call a hockey deal. And those, you need a lot more factors to align when that's the case. And so that's kind of where things sit with him.
Anything else you're hearing? I know last episode I asked you about Claude Giroux and Noah Dobson, among other names, but anything else you're hearing on those guys or anything else or anyone else I haven't even mentioned?
Nothing jumps to mind, honestly. I mean, it's a busy time. There's a lot swirling out there. So I need you to keep me semi-focused at a time like this because my brain's got all kinds of stuff bouncing around in it.
Hey man, we're doing as best as we can over here on over on the video channels here. Jonathan Toews, we should get to him. Literally moments after we finished recording on Friday, that deal got done, where he signs a 1-year contract with the Winnipeg Jets. How do you feel about him re-signing with his hometown team, and what can you say about the contract he signed?
Well, I love the feel-good story aspect of it. I mean, has to be the biggest Jets free agent signing in history. I love that you can see him like putting the pictures up on his IG over the weekend of wearing all the Jets 1.0 gear, talked about going to games at the old Winnipeg Arena and like that being part of where he fell in love with the sport. Reminds me a little bit of, John Tavares with the Leafs pajamas back in the day, which I know became a meme, but, I think if you remove your cynicism for a moment, anyone who's reached that level is, you start somewhere. And for the somewhere for Jonathan Toews, of course, is the city of Winnipeg and watching professional hockey in that city. So I love that aspect of it. I think it could be a tremendous story if he can come back and be a contributor, if the Jets themselves have another big season, which I don't really see why they won't. I know they're in a tough spot where Ehlers, could be leaving town as a UFA, but I mean, they have a lot of the core of that team still in place, and they've just added Jonathan Toews to it. But, the other side of this is that there's certainly an unknown to what Toews will be after 2 full years out of the game of hockey. I know someone who's been skating with him actually as he's been ramping back up here who is singing his praises, like saying like this guy is absolutely 100% ready to be back in the league, going to be impactful. I would say this, the age part, of course, is what gives you pause, but Toews is always someone who took care of himself, and then some. And do you think he'd sign this contract in his hometown if he thought he wasn't going to be good enough to be back? Do you know what I mean? Like there's some risk there for him in a sense. Like, if he goes and isn't able to perform. And look at that. I realize that no one has full clarity when you're making a big decision, but I think it's pretty telling that he was willing to sign in his hometown under these conditions. Like that, I think it's a good sign of where he's at mentally and physically that he can contribute. Now, the contract itself, the way to look at it for me, he's signed a 1-year deal where he's a $5.25 million player. The cap hit could go as much as $7 million. but that the remaining 1.75 million I'm not accounting for, that's all tied to playoff success, winning a Stanley Cup, sort of team things at the end of the year. But if you're just looking at what they're paying him to play for the team, if he plays 60 games next season and they qualify for the playoffs, he's going to make 5.25 million with all the various bonuses in there. Now, if let's hope this doesn't happen, but if he gets back, he can't play, he gets re-injured, the Jets do have some, there's games played bonuses at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 games. So they won't have to pay him that full amount. But I think you have to view him basically as a $5 million center. And that aligns with being a second, third line center in the league right now. And if he can just be that, I think that this is a totally fair deal. I get that why some people it's not a hometown discount. I mean, we should call that what it is. But, and there is risk involved, but I mean, this is sports. This is, we have to, I think it's fair to point out risk, but it's also, you got to say, you got a chance to sign Jonathan Toews. Are you really not going to do it? Are you going to overthink that? Think of the potential reward here. If he becomes an effective player and he's a leader and it's a big boost for the community, for the team, he's worth way more than $5 million too. That could happen. So my reaction is, this is a pretty cool story, and we'll just have to see where it goes. I think, where he's at on October 15th doesn't so much matter either. I mean, the Jets are making this deal, even though it's a 1-year deal, they're making it with the idea that he's going to get more comfortable, that his game's going to grow, that he's going to it might take a little time to get his legs under him, but that he's going to be an effective player over the course of the season. So, he's still out there skating in Arizona right now. It seems like the training's gone really well, and I think it's going to be a cool story when you get to see him. Imagine opening night in Winnipeg when they're announcing him as part of the starting lineup. It was pretty cool, even seeing a 19 Toews jersey in the Jets. I mean, keep in mind, this is not a team that welcomes a lot of players in the door on the free agent market. I mean, it's a big deal, and I think I've got a soft spot for the city of Winnipeg and the Jets organization. I don't think I've ever hid that on the show. They give me a little Green Bay Packers-ish vibes, honestly.
Yeah.
It's such a well-supported team. It's so great going there for a game. There's a lot of things that work against them. They don't have as big of a city and all those things, as big of an arena, but they outpunch their size, and landing the best ever player, arguably, that's ever come from the city of Winnipeg, that's played in the NHL at any point, that's a pretty cool story. And look, they got him over Colorado, a division rival, right? The Avalanche wanted him. And, I think that they were effectively the runner-up. There's a lot of other teams in the mix. I know Montreal called. Obviously, the Canadiens looking to fill their, a hole down the middle for them, down in their lineup beneath Nick Suzuki. The Leafs were in there. A bunch of other teams phoned. But I think ultimately the final decision came down to Winnipeg and Colorado. And, usually when that's the case, we'd be talking about the Avalanche landing the player and the Jets being the runner-up. But in this case, it went the other way.
Yeah, it's a cool story, man. I can't wait to see that opening night, as you mentioned earlier. The arena is going to be loud when they mention Jonathan Toews' name, and he's in that lineup. It's going to be very loud, and we know how loud it can get in Winnipeg. Let's get to Ask CJ. Let's get to some of these questions sent in through social media by our dear loyal listeners and watchers. Optimal Hunter has a question for you. First off, he says he hopes you're feeling better, and he's wondering if there are any dark horse UFAs or trade targets the Toronto Maple Leafs may have. The more ridic, the better.
I don't have it for him, honestly. It's just there's too many moving pieces right now. I realize he wants something juicy, but let's revisit this as we get into the next couple of weeks. But I think that really right now the Leafs are focused on re-signing Tavares, re-signing Nyes. They would like to get in the mix on Marchand if he hits the open market, but we're not sure if that's going to happen. There's a few other down the lineup kind of guys I think that they'll look at, but they're still doing their own business first more than going out. I mean, we just need to know how many holes they have to fill. They don't even know that yet.
Buzz CG13 wants to know, this seems to be a crossroad year for Detroit. 2 seasons where they were in the playoff hunt, but fell short. What do you expect Steve Yzerman will do to get them over the hump?
Probably going to have to be on the trade market. I think they were hoping to be in on the big free agents, a few months ago. It doesn't seem like that's the way the wind is blowing, that they're going to be able to do that. They're in a tough spot. They've just kind of been treading water. Obviously got some really good players. But the money might need to be earned on the trade market for the Red Wings. We curious to see if they can retain Patrick Kane. I think he's of a mind to stay there, but obviously he's another name we haven't talked about on the pod, but we're here a week out, a little more from free agency, and he hasn't re-signed. And so I don't know what the Yzer plan is right now. Obviously they're looking for more good players, but there's not a lot of easy avenues to find them. And I think they're looking for, in particular, some more forwards who can change their look and can be dynamic. And so, I'm sure they'll be in on what they can be on free agency, but it might need to come by a trade.
Mr. Christie wants to know which NHL insider is the cutest.
Me.
Yeah. No hesitation. Let's go.
Oh, come on. Look at the other group.
Yes, sir.
Look at the other group. I don't even think it's a competition.
Yes. Oh, man. CJ stands for conceited journalist.
Hey, the people come for honest answers. They got an honest answer.
I love it. That's great. I love that answer. I almost don't even want to ask you more questions. That was perfect. That was good. I'll give you one more. Adam Noodleman. Are there really so many teams that are sure they should be buyers this offseason? Or is it just teams not wanting to rule out the playoffs before the season starts?
No, there are that many teams. That's something I hear a lot in, again, a variety of conversations around the league. Like, this is a weird time where, other than Pittsburgh, which is openly rebuilding, no one else really doing that. Like, obviously Chicago, San Jose, they've been down the standings and picking at the top of the draft, but like, they're trying to get better. They're trying to add players. Anaheim just hired Joel Quenneville. They're trading for, they got Trouba, they got Kreider. They're getting older. They're trying to be competitive. They took a big jump actually year over year from 2 seasons ago to last season in terms of points in the total. There's no one trying to, there's almost nobody trying to be bad. Like, you would think in a year where Gavin McKenna in 2026 looms as the potential number 1 pick, that there'd be more teams lining up to try to put themselves in a favorable position statistically to draft him. That's not the case right now. Now, that might still happen once the year gets going. But I had someone suggest to me recently too, this next season could be a bad year for GM purging, because not all these teams that are trying to take a step or be competitive are going to be, just the math would suggest, there's not enough wins to go around. And so there's going to be a few teams where internally there's disappointment with ownership or what have you, because of the approach this summer. And so it could be a year next year. I'm not wishing for anyone to lose their job, but like, where we see some turnover at the GM level because of that fact. Because it's just, everything is cyclical, but like right now the cycle is, everything is dialed up to, we got to get better. We have to improve from last season. We want to win more games. We want to get into the playoffs. We want to win another round. Like, it seems like 31 teams are operating that way. That's not favorable math. You know what that means? It's a great time to be a player needing a contract. It could be a great time to be trading players, because I think there's a pretty fervent market out there where teams are looking to accrue and add talent. But we're in this weird timeline where I just don't think this is going to end well in a lot of different cities.
No. Anyway, that's going to do it for Ask CJ. That's going to do it for CJ Show. I'm still happy about the answer to cutest journalist, the cutest insider. Sorry, that was great. Thank you to everyone who subscribed and listened to our show today. We'll be back later this week with a brand new episode of the CJ Show and more off-season coverage as it happens. Great work as always, CJ.
Thanks, brother. Same to you.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.